Okay, here come folks. I see two familiar names and some more coming in. Great, great. Welcome, everybody. While folks are piling in and we are waiting on our guest, Julienne Shields, she is just momentarily delayed. She'll be with us shortly. But while we wait and get folks joining us, if you wouldn't mind putting your name, where you're calling in from, in the chat, just to get the conversation started. And if you feel comfortable with it, let us know what you're hoping to get out of this conversation. I'll get that ball rolling here in the chat myself. And while we wait, I'll run through some basic housekeeping, as it were. Gary, that went to just the host and panelists. We are recording this, as you may have heard as you were joining us, which means we will be sending the recording out after the completion of this, usually within 24 hours, typically less than that. We'll include the recording, any relevant links to things that we mentioned during this. We often include the chat, things like that, because we tend to share a lot of really useful tips and links to books that we reference, things like that, in the chat as well. You'll also see, if you're joining us via Zoom and not calling in, that we do have a live transcript going. That'll be included in the recording as well. If you have questions, and here's our guest now, if you do have questions as we're going through this, please feel free to put those in the chat or the Q&A function. I'll be monitoring those and interrupting the conversation. Hi, Julienne.
Hi. Sorry, laughing. I'm joining from East Carolina University, Miller School of Entrepreneurship today. So
great.
They're getting some free advertising here.
There you go. That's awesome. Great. Well, we were just running through some quick housekeeping measures, if you will. We are sharing this recording within 24 hours, just so you know. And the way we typically format these is you and Gary will chat for 25, 30 minutes or so while we get some chat going. And then I'll pop in, I'll turn my camera off. When I turn it back on, that means, hey, we've got some good stuff to incorporate the audience with. So we try to keep it about half and half Q&A and conversation with you all.
Perfect.
Yeah, great. Lots of familiar names and some new names in here as well. We've got Jamie Newcomb from Career Source in Flagler, Volusia, Susan Coral from Worcester, Ohio. Hey, you're basically in our backyard, Susan. Javier, who was just recently trained as a Ice House facilitator. Great to see you again, Javier. Clarissa, Cheryl, Lourdes. Oh, Lourdes, one of our best friends. And Jeremy, who was just on a similar webinar of ours a few weeks ago. So welcome, everybody. I think I've covered everything, Gare. If not, let me know. But otherwise, let's not keep these folks waiting and get the conversation started.
All right, let's do it. You can hear me okay, Nick?
Yep, you sound great.
Julienne, good. All right, well, this is going to be a great conversation. I'm super excited to welcome everyone to another episode of Entrepreneurship in Education. My name is Gary Schoniger. I'm the founder and CEO of the Entrepreneurial Learning Initiative. That's ELI. We're the world's leading provider of entrepreneurial mindset, education, training, professional and organizational development. So today our guest is Julienne Shields, whom I met, I don't know, 2 or 3 years ago through NACCE, I think.
Yeah, that's right.
And I recently bumped into her at an airport in Frankfurt on our way to Riyadh for the Global Entrepreneurship Congress. We got to hang out there a little bit. But Julienne is the executive director, if I had that correct. If I don't,
CEO,
please.
pretty much same type of thing. Yep.
Thank you, of USASBE, which is the United States. Can help me out with the alphabet soup here?
Yeah, United States Association for Small Business and Entrepreneurship.
Small Business and Entrepreneurship, exactly. And so, Julienne, welcome to this webinar. I'm delighted to have this conversation with you. Just want to start by asking, what is the mission of USASBE?
Yeah, USASBE is an inclusive community advancing entrepreneurship education through bold teaching, scholarship, and practice. So we feel very strongly that entrepreneurship itself, it's not just teaching. You also have to have good research bases. And then, of course, entrepreneurship, as you're teaching it, is it's a practice-based approach, right? You have to practice it and do it in order to really get it and understand if it resonates with you. So that's kind of our mission. And it's all about boldly doing all three of those things: teaching, boldly researching, and boldly practicing.
Yeah, the practicing part is the hard part, right? That's really the hard part. And a lot of people think, well, you can't really teach entrepreneurship if you haven't practiced it. And I don't know that that's true. I think it's helpful if I don't know, I'd love to hear what you have to say about this, but I think it's just important that you relinquish your role as subject matter expert. Does that make sense to you?
Absolutely. And certainly you can teach entrepreneurship and entrepreneurial mindset, even if you haven't been officially an entrepreneur yourself. In fact, many people are very entrepreneurial, whether or not they actually are an owner in a business. So being able to kind of evoke and create, as an educator, if you can evoke and create a situation, a learning situation in a classroom or other type of place where you're effective in teaching entrepreneurial mindset and entrepreneurial practices, then that's a good educator. That's how you're teaching entrepreneurship. Conversely, there are some amazing entrepreneurs who are not very good at teaching entrepreneurship, right? Because they think they're the best and they think they're always right, perhaps because they have to have that boldness in their own companies and environments, but they might not be able to pedagogically kind of bridge that gap to educate other people.
That is so spot on. There's nothing more annoying than someone who's been successful as an entrepreneur in which they use their own experience for the basis of as the sole source of their understanding of entrepreneurship. I think that's really, really spot on. But there's a lot of challenges. I mean, I've been thinking about this for a long time, and I think, we've ignored entrepreneurship for most of the last century, right? I mean, we really didn't. I think it was like in the 1980s, somebody, an economist, I forgot his name, Birch, wrote a book about, small businesses are actually creating like almost all new jobs, which was a shock to everyone because most people just assumed that large corporations were creating all the jobs. And I think that was, maybe the onset of the awareness. I mean, even though that like economists going back to the 30s, Schumpeter, began to recognize the importance of entrepreneurship, but part of it, this is a challenge, and I want to dig into a little bit with you today, is that I think we're so steeped in what I would call a managerial paradigm that makes it difficult to understand an entrepreneurial mindset. I mean, I like to use this parable from a famous commencement address given by the philosopher David Foster Wallace, in which he said there's these two young fish swimming along, and they pass an older fish, and the older fish says, "Good morning, fellas, how's the water?" And the two younger fish just continue to swim on until one of them looks at the other and says, "What the hell is water?" And I think that we're so steeped in these managerial assumptions whose roots lie in the dawn of the Industrial Revolution that are about efficiency and replication of useful things. And the environments that are focused on the replication, the efficient replication and distribution of useful things are not really conducive to the development of the attitudes and skills required to discover useful things, if that makes any sense.
Oh, yeah, no, absolutely. And there's certainly a place for achieving efficiencies and all the things that managerial thinking are. There's certainly a place and an importance to that. But as we're really looking at building new solutions, when you go out into the desert, I'll use the desert since we were just there. When you go out into the desert, there's there might be some pathways, but the sand always blows over the pathways. So you have to have the skills in order to forge ahead in ambiguous situations, and that's just not what management's about. So,
right. I wholeheartedly agree, Julienne, that we need both. But in the past, we didn't. We had long product life cycles, and you could go to work in a company and be assured of like lifetime employment and economic security and so forth. I mean, who was it? William White, I think, in his book Organization Man, he kind of laid that out, the expectations of this thriving industrial economy. And I think the remnants of that thinking still remain.
Absolutely. I think that the Industrial Revolution did quite the number on our ability as a culture to pass along the entrepreneurial mindset. I think it was kind of how it happened before, and then the Industrial Revolution happened, and everyone had their little place, their little cog, if you will.
The division of labor.
They stopped learning around the kitchen table or dinner table how to survive, how to think entrepreneurially, look for opportunity, be bootstrap and be creative. That didn't become part of the narrative within homes, and now we really have to. Now we're playing catch up with how we are trying to scaffold around educational opportunities to help our young people and older people learn these things.
I love that. That's exactly right, and I think we are playing catch up, and part of that catch up is that I don't think a lot of folks understand the ways in which like routinized other directed learning tend to undermine the development of entrepreneurial skills, which I would describe as adaptive skills. I saw this in Riyadh, Julienne. I watched, I was participating in a session about youth entrepreneurship. It's very common, I see this. Well, here's our curriculum. First, we teach them this, and then we teach them that, and then we teach them about finance, and then about marketing, and then about. And it's so frustrating to me because I'm saying, like, to the extent to which you keep providing directives and intervening and measuring and guiding is the extent to which you're undermining the individual's ability to develop entrepreneurial skills. Does that make any sense to you?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And educators are taught to have a plan, right? They need to plan, they need to have the curriculum laid out. And what's one of the other words I'm thinking of, there's a pacing guide, right? In some cases with some educators, right? There's this kind of pacing. What is it supposed to be like? And the adaptive part, you hit the nail on the head with that word, right? It's like, it's good to have a plan, but the adaptation and the adults' comfortability with, or comfort with adapting when something comes into unexpected comes into the equation, I think is more of an educational modeling tool than just sticking with the plan. I actually want to share something with you. It's along those lines, something that's happening right now, and it just happened. I noticed it this weekend, and it was one of those aha moments. It was like next level entrepreneurial mindset opportunity. So, Gary, as you know, I have a son who has Down syndrome, and he is now participating as a kind of an atypical actor in a college level production of Romeo and Juliet. And the professor has asked some atypical youth actors to be involved in the play, kind of as street urchins within Verona, right? So they're street urchins. And here's the brilliance of what he wanted to, the experience he was developing for his college students. Shakespeare is a very a traditional structured production typically. And so in order to help them learn what it's like to be improvisational within this structure, he's infused these atypical actors that you can't predict what they're going to do. These youth, right. And what's happened, I observed one of these technical rehearsals. the kids are kind of doing what they feel is right, even though they're told to do one thing. They're improving, the children are. And the initial response of the college actors is, well, wait, that wasn't part of the plan. And the professor comes in and says, but that's okay. So what do we do when this happens? What do we do when they start acting like elephants and there's no elephants in the play, right? So how do you roll with it? How do you engender and encourage that behavior and keep the production going? And that is probably what I consider one of the most beautiful examples of an educator creating an environment where they are helping their students learn how to be entrepreneurial in the moment.
100%. I love that. That's I think about entrepreneurship like this, Adam Smith wrote this in 1776, something to the effect, I'm paraphrasing, that we all live by exchanging, right? And I don't think that's changed much. And I don't think that's going to change in the near future. But I think we have to look at that and say, like, okay, what is the useful thing that we exchange? With whom are we exchanging it? And what is the method by which we learn how to make ourselves useful? Is it other directed or is it self-directed? And I think, so Smith wrote this in 1776. I'm just again paraphrasing, but he said when our work is reduced to like routinized tasks, we lose the ability to solve problems because they never arise. And you said that a minute ago, like the Industrial Revolution kind of did a number, like it lifted mankind out of like abject poverty, but it came at the expense of our ability to adapt in a lot of ways. And more recently, the cognitive psychologist Gary Klein has written extensively about this, the ways in which the over-reliance on rule structures and artificial intelligence inhibits our ability to develop reason and judgment. And the more rule-bound an organization is, or the more rule-bound a system is, the less likely the people in that system are to have insights, right? So I think the question is, how do we make ourselves useful to other humans outside of known systems? And that's what you're talking about your son. How do you adapt? How do you make yourself useful outside of known systems without the guidance of a professional teacher, without a predetermined curricula with predetermined paths and outcomes? And, that's really the question. That's where the adaptive skills.
I agree. And I think, and I don't know all the answers, by the way. I spitball a lot of this stuff and have a lot of great conversations with folks, but I think starting with the student, right? I mean, if as educators, our mindset starts with what does the student need and want, and knowing that every student is going to have a different experience based on what they bring to the table and what's in their head, right? So if you have that student-centered approach to teaching and really try to just develop them in some way, shape, or form, that's a good place to start. And if you spend the time to get to know the students and kind of where they're at, whether that's with a pre-survey of some kind, how creative do they feel they are, or how do they feel like they could survive a challenge of some kind, or are they hesitant about it? Like, where are they at, and how can you kind of bring them through that? So I love the idea. That's the North Star for most excellent educators, is focusing on the student first. And I think that makes a lot of sense, because whether you're teaching entrepreneurship or entrepreneurial mindset to if it's like a prison entrepreneurship program, or perhaps it's at MIT, you've got different levels of situations in those two but an educator will meet the need, a good educator will meet the needs of whatever situation that those students are in. So I think that's where I kind of come back to, is starting with where your students are and what they need.
Yeah, that's spot on in my view, Julianne. I think of this like sort of a Venn diagram. You know, when we're encouraged to pursue what is innately interesting to us, what we're capable of becoming good at, let's call those our virtues. And we're encouraged to pursue those in ways that benefit other humans. In the intersection of those three spheres, we become optimally engaged, right? We tap into the most potent form of human motivation, which is intrinsic motivation. We no longer need to be coerced with carrots and sticks, right? And that's part of the fundamental shift that again, I saw this in Riyadh, entrepreneurship education is about intrinsic motivation. And if you're trying to do it with carrots and sticks, which are extrinsic motivators, you're missing the whole point.
Yeah.
And it is about, it's so student centric. I mean, that's really.
And the carrots and sticks, I love this. I'd like to kind of delve into this a little bit more, because of course grades are a part of this whole issue, right? I mean, most entrepreneurship educators kind of roll their eyes at grades and see them as a necessary evil, but it also could be an evil, right? I mean, it could be something that actually is demotivating or hinders true entrepreneurial mindset in some ways. So I'm always interested to hear what educators think about grades and grading or assessment, and maybe not assessment so much. I actually think that there's some value there, but grades in particular, I sit back and I listen to what others are, how others are handling the grade.
Yeah,
problem.
That's a great question to put in the chat for folks here. Like, how do you see grades, and how relevant are grades in the realm of entrepreneurship education? I think the bigger thing, like maybe I'll call it the elephant in the living room, Julianne, is I think, people are waking up to the fact that the world is changing in ways that now require everyone to think like entrepreneurs, to be innovative and entrepreneurial. And yet so many of us still think of it in this binary way. Oh, you own a business, you're going to be off in the entrepreneur track. Everyone else goes down the employee track. And I think, the world's waking up to this, but we still kind of struggle with that binary understanding. And I think the elephant in the living room is that it's about culture change, right? It's reflective of a broader cultural change that's underfoot. We do a lot of work with community colleges, and I can't really, speak with any real authority for like four-year universities, but I have a lot of friends that teach in community college, and they're saying, look, people can take courses online, like through Google Education, and get $80,000 coding jobs, but they go into community college and they're treated as if it's like 13th grade, and people are forced to take courses they don't want to take in order to get to the ones they really do. It's just, I think entrepreneurship education is sort of the out in front in that cultural shift. What do you think about that?
Yeah, no, I definitely think that there's a lot to that. And what I think makes it's the big question that I still get from time to time is entrepreneurship is a discipline. It's a legitimate discipline, but it's also a vehicle. And in four-year institutions, many of the things, or community college, or any group really, it's a vehicle to unlock potential no matter what somebody wants to study or do. So it's a way of adding value no matter what somebody is learning. And so when I would have entrepreneurship majors, back when I was at a university, the big question I would really ask those students is, what do you want to do with your entrepreneurship major? What is it that you feel like this is going to unlock for you? Because there's all manner of other skills you're going to need to probably learn at some point. And so it was just one of those interesting, one of those interesting questions that I've always had. And most of the entrepreneurship majors didn't get out of college and start their own business. They got out of college and joined as an entrepreneur at some other major company. So it's so that's to your point of it's a cultural shift, right? Big companies are wanting entrepreneurial people, but is that what an entrepreneurship major is really trying to achieve? I'm not really sure, to be honest with you, but I think it's great that the people who are entrepreneurial are sought out, and many times, while they think that's great, they're also doing the seeking themselves. They're seeking for solving problems, and they're seeking for different opportunities. And so whether you're being sought out or you're doing the one seeking, it's this entrepreneurial ethos that is really building in our culture.
Yeah, and I think, one of the fundamental shifts that's entrepreneurship education is a part of, or that we should be striving towards, Julienne, is okay, let me just back up. People ask me, what is an entrepreneurial mindset? Be specific. And my answer is sometimes, well, I don't know. What is a non-entrepreneurial mindset? Right? Like, you can't really understand an entrepreneurial mindset until you can understand your own mindset, your own deeply held assumptions, and you can look at them and compare them in a non-evaluative manner. You can look at the values and assumptions, right? I mean, mindset is to an individual what culture is to a group. And I think that's a useful way to think about it.
I like that.
Right? Because we understand how to talk about culture, right? There are the visible artifacts, there are the espoused values, and then there are the deeply held assumptions, which are the cause of the artifacts, are the true cause of the artifacts. So kind of back to the grading thing, like, let me just air one of my grievances about entrepreneurship education, one of many grievances about it's, I say that in sort of tongue in cheek. I really, my passion and my mission is to help educators understand how to do this effectively, how to create effective entrepreneurial learning environments. But what I see is so many people trying to do this through a managerial lens, right? And it doesn't work. Like, the rules for survival in a managerial paradigm don't work. The rules for teaching in a managerial paradigm don't work. But one of my pet peeves, Julienne, is the pitch competition. I mean, I think most people are over the business plan. I did a main stage talk in Riyadh, and I said, for goodness sakes, please, like, stop with the business plan. And the whole room erupted in applause. It was great. So I'm hoping that most people have kind of moved beyond the business plan. But now we're at the pitch competition. And I'll tell you the reason I don't like the pitch competition. Because it relies on the opinions of others. It's not evidence-based. It's opinion-based. And the nature of entrepreneurship is such that we're often dabbling in ideas for which we have no precedent.
Yeah.
Right? And so it needs to be an evidence-based process. The opinion of, like, stop trying to emulate Shark Tank, for God's sakes, right? It's got to be an evidence-based process. And I think, so I'd love to hear what you have to say about this. I'd love to hear what others on the call had to say about that.
Absolutely. And so I see pitch competitions. I think that there are, if it's being done in such a way that you're trying to develop competencies for communicating an idea, right? Or telling the story of how you did go out and collect evidence, and kind of demonstrating your story on a stage in order to be kind of evaluated. But to your point about if one idea is better than another based on the number of judges or the opinions of judges, yeah, that's not the market, right? It's not.
That's it. Right.
That's the lowest scoring team in a pitch competition could ultimately be the one that has the most market validity and goes on to be, extremely successful. So I think it's important to see them for what they are. I think that having them be developmental, having it be a milestone that people work towards to try to perform. And I think performing is one of those skills that entrepreneurs need to be able to do. Is to be able to, when the chips are down and when it's stressful, how do you step up and speak about it? I think that there's some developmental things there that are good, but is one product or innovation better than another based on a pitch competition? I agree with you. I don't think that there's really much to that.
Yeah. And I like what you said, like there's some value in it. Like, can I see the person's passion and dedication to the idea? But let's not forget that entrepreneurship is an evidence-based process.
Yes.
It's not gambling. It's not fortune telling. It's not planning. Yeah. As Steve Blank is, famous for saying, like a startup is a temporary organization searching for a repeatable, scalable business model.
Absolutely. And at the end of the day, timing plays such a huge part in the relevancy or success factors. So, and that's just not something that you're going to get based on the timing of when a pitch competition is happening. So
yeah. And I see Clarissa is asking, like, how would we measure as evidence? Like, that's a great question, Clarissa. Like, it's evidence of usefulness. If we step out, what an entrepreneur is doing is trying to figure out how to make him or herself useful to other humans outside of known systems. And in my view, it's actually biomimicry. That's how organisms orient themselves in unfamiliar environments. They try lots of little things. They micro experiment, so they reduce the cost of failure and they amplify the learning and the feedback loop. But Clarissa, to your question, I would say that evidence of usefulness primarily would be currency. When people other than your mother-in-law are paying you for your solution, they're saying to you, this is useful to me. But I would also say that currency isn't the only evidence of usefulness. It could be buy-in from your colleagues. It could be users, subscribers, followers, readers, whatever. The point being that it's evidence-based, and I just think that's really the important point that needs to be made here. Now, Nick just popped in, which means he's going to intervene on our.
Oh, I was going to read Clarissa's question that you read out, but there are a couple other great comments. You all asked a question earlier about everyone's thoughts regarding grading, so I wanted to highlight some of those. But first, just in kind of in line with where we were just talking, John is asking, what would be some examples of meaningful metrics to track your own entrepreneurial thinking and goals? And Julienne, maybe you could take that one first, because you kind of mentioned evaluation being a useful thing as opposed to grading.
Yeah, well, right, like some kind of assessment metrics. So I mentioned, it's kind of silly, but I taught a class. It was a retail art gallery course where students were basically putting together the retail art gallery. We had art students doing it, and we had business students coming together, very different skill sets in order to, create this experience for the community. And we always did a pre-assessment, and it was fascinating to me. And they were very aware. They got to keep their pre-assessment, and they got to reflect on it at the end too. But one of the things that we assumed was always going to go up was people's creativity, right? So they came in, they gave themselves kind of a 1 to 10 on resilience, creativity. We had like 7 or 9 different measures. And I'll just mention this, is that the creativity one always started quite high. By the time they got through the experience, and it was a group and a team experience, they realized that, wow, some of their ideas were really bad, and maybe they weren't as creative and successful as they thought. And by the end, they were scoring themselves lower on creativity, but higher on resiliency. Like, yeah, so
Ah,
I heard some bad things. I'm not as amazing as I thought I was, but I was able to get past it and get through it. And so I don't know that kind of answers your question, John, but that's giving yourself some touch points. How do you feel in this moment? What
right.
is your impression of yourself or your students at this moment? And how does that change over the course of an experience? And reflection
Yeah,
on that is very helpful.
Yeah, that's
absolutely.
good. That's really good, Julianne. And I think, to me, the holy grail of entrepreneurship education is perceived self-efficacy. Maybe a close second to that would be perceived locus of control. I'm actually toying with a new phrase called perceived locus of value creation.
Ooh.
Like, is someone else going to tell me what's useful, or am I going to figure that out for myself? I mean,
Sure.
in my mind, Julianne, the essence of an entrepreneurial mindset, I should say the genesis of an entrepreneurial mindset, is an underlying, mostly unconscious assumption that it's up to me to figure out how to make myself more useful to more humans. And the more useful I become, the better off I'm going to be.
Right.
Yeah.
And,
Right.
I like to ask people the question, what is preventing you from making yourself more useful to more humans? And that question is designed to evoke deeply held beliefs and values and assumptions that we don't know we have.
Totally.
Right? Yeah. And
Ooh.
that's, I think mindset's probably more important than entrepreneurship. Right? I mean, the purpose of a mindset is to think without thinking.
Mm.
We acquire beliefs, schemas, mental models, and so forth, and then we relegate them to habitual control in order to be able to navigate life, right?
Yep.
And once we relegate these schemas or beliefs or assumptions to habitual control, our brains aren't very good at recognizing the cause and effect correlation. Right? So a mindset in motion, and then you add on top of that like all manner of cognitive biases. And so a mindset becomes a mindset. It becomes a fixed way of thinking that shapes our thoughts and deeds. Sorry.
The glories of working from home.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that shape our thoughts and deeds without our conscious awareness, right? So the question becomes like, how do we change our mindset? Like, I think the big question, Julianne, is how do we intervene, or how do we identify and overcome beliefs that we don't know we have?
Right.
Yeah, so that's a great question. And before I jump into that, I wanted to mention you're absolutely right. This mindset piece, and what we think. And I do consider myself a fairly entrepreneurial person. When somebody asks, "Well, why do you do that?" I'm like, "Because that's just how it works. That's just how you get things done. That's that's just how my mind works, right?"
Yeah.
And so it's kind of hard to take a few steps back and say, okay, well, if they don't understand how I'm doing this, but I want them to act in this way when something comes, when stimuli comes, right?
Right.
What do I need to do to move them into the realm of being able to operate in a way that's going to be I say efficient. I actually think being entrepreneurial is efficient because you're solving problems and
Yeah.
you're moving on. But you're right. It's like, it gets back to that point of sometimes amazing entrepreneurs, if they don't recognize that their mindset is a certain way, they're not always the best educators unless they are able to step back and say, I developed into this. I wasn't just born this way. Things happened and I developed these skills, and now I need to unpack some of those things and then help others develop them in some way, shape, or form. And I do think it is practice. I think it is having situations in which you're forced out of your comfort zone, or students are forced out of their comfort zone in order to try to noodle a problem.
Totally.
Which kind of gets back to my issue. How do you grade that? It's even failure. As long as you try something and you fail, you have still learned. As long as you're, acknowledging and respecting, okay, that didn't work. What
That's
do we
right.
do now? So I
Well,
think it's practice.
And to that point, Julienne, I said earlier that the rules for survival in managerial learning systems don't work in entrepreneurial learning systems. And one of the points that you just sort of brought forth is that entrepreneurial learning is discovery learning.
Yeah.
And it requires the biomimicry thing. It's an error-based learning process. And so that you can see straight away why it doesn't work within traditional teaching method and why students at first are very nervous. And it's the 4.0 students that struggle the mightiest because they're so averse to the error-based thing. They're so inured to I know what I got to do to get the biscuit. And entrepreneurship is exactly the opposite. But there's another point to be made here, Julienne. And we're educators. And so we tend to think of formalized learning structures. And the OECD has written about this for a while now. Like, we need to embrace informal and non-formal learning. So what does that mean? Most of what entrepreneurs learn, they don't know, they know. So they learn, it's like implicit learning. And I've looked at the research. There's a scholar named Arthur Reber who's written about this, and maybe you can put a link in there somewhere, some of his stuff, Nick. But here's the fascinating thing about implicit learning. Our brains are much more adept at implicit learning because we've been doing it for thousands of years, maybe hundreds of thousands of years, long before we ever had, a written word or a spoken language. And it's also IQ independent, which is also interesting. It just relies on entirely different neural processes than the transfer of explicit knowledge. So here's a fun fact. Like, a dog can do it as well as you can. It's like species independent, it's IQ independent, it's age independent, right? Which explains the banality of the entrepreneur. I mean, why they're very often C students, right? They're relying on a different part of their brain to learn. And so the knowledge we acquire through implicit learning is tacit knowledge. I know more than I'm able to tell. You interview an entrepreneur, so this goes back to the culture thing, right? You see the successful entrepreneur, you can see the visible artifacts, right? The business, the money, the blah, 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 blah. And then you ask them, level 2, how did you do that, Julienne? You borrowed $5,000 from your mother-in-law 20 years ago, and now you got this amazing business that employs hundreds of people and blah, 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 blah. And you're likely to give me an answer that, I worked really hard and I never gave up. It's just not that useful, right? And it really takes ethnography. It takes an anthropologist, which is to really understand what's going on there. What are the causal factors? What are the controllable causal factors that enable you to do that?
Yeah.
It's mind-boggling to me. And it's just, we need to understand, it goes back to the measurement thing. We need to understand that only a small percentage of learning occurs through the formal learning process. And that's particularly relevant to entrepreneurial learning.
Absolutely. Yeah. And how do you teach intuition in a classroom, right? I mean, it's one of those things you just kind of noodle, like, you can't teach intuition. That's something that grows and builds over experiences over time. And so it's almost like how much life can you pack into children's early years, right? So, and that was one of the things we had kind of talked about was, and there's not, to my knowledge, there's not research about this, but is there an optimal time by which young people, if they have these kind of nuggets of entrepreneurial mindset by a certain age, do their outcomes and their ability to be entrepreneurial in the long run go up dramatically? Kind of like reading. If literacy, there's a lot of research with literacy. It would be fascinating to find out if there's a similar type of kind of age that it's appropriate and great to have that entrepreneurial mindset already established.
Well, and to that point, Julienne, I think let's go back to the managerial mindset as sort of the control group for the entrepreneurial mindset, right? Like there's the managerial mindset is focused on replication and efficiency of known things, of known products and services, right? And so there are like deeply held level 3 assumptions about stability, about other directedness, about routinization, about predictability. And those are so deeply embedded. I mean, I hear educators talk about, career paths, and I kind of like shudder, like, tell me what you mean when you say career path, because that implies linearity, it implies stability, and the world is anything but. And that's, go ahead.
Well, and let's think about the structures of things like tenure within 4-year institutions, right? And even some school districts have tenure as part of their structure.
Incentives,
You achieve tenure by meeting certain goals which are, have to do with certain kind of evaluation, which is falling in line a certain way, and that's
compliance.
Right. It's a compliance system, and it's a very challenging thing to create within a university. And this is the challenge that I would have for any university that is trying to be entrepreneurial, is to allow for significant amounts of failure with your young faculty. Allow them to create environments and experiences that have almost no chance of success, let's say, right? I mean, that are almost crazy and out there, because the learning that will happen for that faculty member and for those students, that's the important thing. I mean, you don't want, train wrecks, but what are ways in which you can make it safe and comfortable for young faculty to try innovative and entrepreneurial new experiences for young people, and use reflection as a way of determining, was this meaningful for the student?
Yeah. I like that. And again, it goes back to my point about micro experimentation. You reduce the cost of failure and you amp up an organism trying to orient itself in unfamiliar terrain. You reduce the cost of failure through micro experimentation, which not only increases the probability that you'll survive, but it also increases the feedback loop, the failure-based feedback loop that actually generates a solution. And you made the point earlier. I've had many arguments with entrepreneurship educators, small business development types, whatever, and lamenting like the bad ideas that the students put forth. And I always bristle at that. First of all, I don't think any of us are qualified to determine a good idea from a bad idea. I mean, that's the nature of it. If we were sitting around, 15 years ago talking about, I want to start, or 10 years ago, I want to start a company renting, spare bedrooms out to strangers, people would just say that's the dumbest thing I ever heard of. Right. And so, first of all, none of us are qualified. I mean, venture capitalists get this wrong like almost all the time. People with millions of dollars of their own money on the line get it wrong almost all the time. So there's that. But the second point is that we want the student to discover that the idea is bad, like on their own, right, not being told by someone else. I need to come to that conclusion through experimentation. But here's the real thing, Julienne, like lots of bad ideas turn into good ideas. Yeah. And you can't just stifle an idea right from the rip. You have to encourage the experimentation. And I think it was Drucker who said, like, when a business does succeed, very often it's not with the customers that originally anticipated, not the product or service that's being used it's a discovery process. Yeah. And I think, what we're talking about here is mindset intervention. Yeah. Right. And I think, I'm sort of answering my own question. I asked him, like, how do we intervene on our own beliefs and assumptions we don't know we have?
Oof, yeah.
And I think the answer to that is fairly straightforward. And the first step, I've got this 5 points here. Let me see how this flies with you and the people on the call. So the first thing is, you have to realize that you are looking at the world through a lens. Right? Your view of the world is not an exact replica, as Daniel Kahneman would say. And so the first step is just to have that recognition that I have a mindset, and it's a belief system that is perfectly designed to create the outcomes that it's creating. Step one. Step two, undertake an adaptive challenge. That's an entrepreneurial project. In the margins, using your discretionary time, thought, effort, resources, figure out how to make yourself useful to other humans outside of a known system. That's the second sort of step. Like, put yourself in the arena. Don't quit your day job. Don't drop out of school. Don't mortgage your future. Just start experimenting. Step three, immerse yourself in a community of practice. Surround yourself with other entrepreneurs. That's how we transfer tacit knowledge. The best thing a college or university can do is create these ecosystems, 1 million cups or places where entrepreneurs from the community can come in and populate and encourage students to interact. That's how we transfer tacit knowledge. It's cultural immersion. Step four, get yourself a mentor. Because the mentor sort of plays the role as your private cultural anthropologist who can help tease out self-limiting beliefs. And then the fifth step is just to continue to reflect and recognize that, the outcomes you're creating are generated by the beliefs. I think that's what every student should experience, regardless of what their chosen path is.
I really like that. And I'm going to use a little different language on some of it. I think the process is beautiful. I'm going to use a little different language because I wrote these down because when you said the adaptive process, like immerse yourself in an adaptive process, as a professional who's had an actual job for quite some time now, I was an entrepreneur, but I've been working for some time. In order to be an entrepreneur, number two, or immerse yourself in an adaptive process, say yes to something where other people are saying no. Like that, that would be the thing. Like, it's like, say yes, or say, I can do that. Raise your hand. Even if you don't know how to solve the problem, say yes. And put yourself in a situation where you have to surround yourself with a community of practice, right? Now you need to go out and seek mentors. That's a way to start changing your behavior if you're within a corporation or within an organization. So say yes. The other thing I would just kind of tweak on number 4, I think we need more than one mentor. Because if it's just one, they're going to say, oh, that's a dumb idea. Or at some point, their lens is going to start shaping your lens. And so I like to have an advisory, like a personal advisory team, right? And so 100%. I'll run ideas past a few different people, and they all know I'm either going to take some of what they say and I'm going to not take other things that they say. But that way, if we're all working on that, they're my people, right? They're my advisors that I love and adore, and maybe someday I'll get to return the favor.
Yeah. I love that, Julienne. And it's a great point. Like, it's not just one mentor. Start there. I think mentoring is the most underutilized, most powerful, potent resources that's available to anybody. And we don't do it. And, let's go back to mindset for a second. I just finished reading not long ago Martin Seligman's book called The Hope Circuit, which is mostly a memoir, but what he revealed at the end is that, his 40 years of research about learned helplessness, he found out that, like, helplessness is not learned. Control is learned. And that he actually laid out the circuitry in the brain. Like when you're faced with an adaptive challenge, our brains reach into our memory to determine whether or not we can escape this adverse situation. And if our brains determine that it's not escapable, it shuts down the fight or flight response and induces passivity. If we determine that it is escapable, it activates fight or flight. And we start thinking about, how am I going to do this? How am I going to get out of that? Right. And I think, Seligman has done the research around, learned helplessness or default helplessness with dogs and rats and so on and so forth. But he's also doing a bunch of research now in this emerging field called prospection. Prospection theory. There's a paper he wrote I highly recommend to this crowd. It's called, Nick is probably going to drop it in here. It's called Driven by the Past or Navigating the Future. And what he's saying is that, and I think this is really what distinguishes the entrepreneur from the non-entrepreneur, is they have a compelling goal. And what Seligman is laying out is that when we're striving towards a more positive outcome, some positive thing on the future that we're on the horizon that we're striving to get to, our brains are able to access problem-solving abilities that are otherwise not available to us. And I think, when I started digging into that paper, I realized, one of the things that's happening to the entrepreneur is the compelling nature of the goal they're pursuing is acting on the individual. So we tend to make this fundamental attribution error, right? That Julienne is just entrepreneurial. She was born with some traits that make her entrepreneurial. And they fail to recognize the goal that you're pursuing and the way your relationship to that goal and the ways in which that goal is acting upon you. That makes any sense?
It makes a lot of sense.
Right. But so he laid this out, Julienne, in his paper. So he put one example, he put rats in a tea maze. And the rats learn that they turn right at the decision point, the T, they turn right, they get the reward. And then they ablate the left hemisphere of the rat's brain, either chemically or electronically. So the rat can no longer turn right. And the rat gets to the decision point and turns left 270 degrees to get right. There's no rat manual that taught him how to do that. They've never seen another rat do that. It's just an example of and so I'd like to ask people the question, do you have a compelling goal? And if not, why not? Because in the absence of a compelling goal, you're just not likely to self-actualize, to become all that you could become. And I'll just end here. I'm a fan of the humanist psychology and the humanist tradition. And I think when we zoom out, Julienne, we look at entrepreneurial people, all we're looking at are human beings trying to self-actualize. That's all. It's how entrepreneurship educators, that's all we're really trying to facilitate.
I do not disagree with that. I'm not going to challenge that at all, because I come back to it's a vehicle and it's a discipline. And for most people, it's a vehicle and it's an extremely powerful vehicle. And you don't want to, yes. You want to give everybody that vehicle. Everybody should have a vehicle to go somewhere and do something. And we need to know ourselves and what our mission is, what's our purpose. And with that,
that's it.
Once we have that, then we can really start to build that vehicle, right, for ourselves. And how do we outfit and make it our vehicle as we move on and achieve our goals. So I love that. I love the self-actualization piece. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like, Naval Ravikant talks about this, back to my Venn diagram, your interest in your abilities, those are your virtues, right? And what Naval talks about is If you just draw a circle around your interests and abilities, and if you work in that space, you are able to escape competition through authenticity. Like you're being authentic. And by the way, the World Economic Forum, and there's other scholars I'm finding, his name escapes me at the moment, who are starting to write about the developmental benefits of entrepreneurship education, about the ability to live authentically and true to oneself, true to one's virtues. And I firmly believe that we should emphasize the developmental benefits, and the economic will take care of themselves. That's how we should think about entrepreneurship education.
Totally.
Love it.
Well, looking at our time, I hate to cut this fantastic conversation short, but Julienne, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a real pleasure, but I wanted to give you a chance. Anything you'd like to leave the audience with, upcoming events, anything you'd like them to take away from USASBE's work?
Well, USASBE is a member-driven organization, and so if you haven't looked up USASBE, we used to be a once-a-year conference organization. We are so much more than that now. We have a lot of different convening opportunities, professional development opportunities for adults to become better educators, and different communities of practice around different kinds of special interest groups. We're an all year round organization now, and it's a place where you can come and meet your posse and start to really, with your mission and your purpose in life, find those people who are going to go along with you and join in the journey.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
I've got a link to your website where folks can learn more in the chat. So if you have any questions about USASBE, feel free to send those over to me and we can forward those along. Unless, is there a way people can reach you?
Yeah, CEO@usasbe.org. Yeah,
Perfect.
absolutely. And I see Clint making some nice comments in there. Clint,
Yes.
you're best. Thank
Yes,
you for
Clint
being
is
a part
great.
of our community.
Yes.
Awesome.
Fantastic.
Awesome.
Well, thank you so much, everyone. We'll send this recording out within the next 24 hours. And so keep an eye out for that email.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Julienne. Great to see you
Gary.
again, and look forward to our next conversation.
Yes.
Sounds fantastic. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.